The Scroll and the Stone. Health Laws of Moses Vindicated by Modern Science. More than 1400 years before Christ, Moses wrote a set of laws for the children of Israel. The measures instituted in those laws have repeatedly been supported by the experiments and discoveries of modern science. The March Book for the Month selection includes a survey of these laws and shows how scientists and physicians are daily proving that Moses' health laws were far ahead of his time. When you send in your gift this month, be sure to ask for the copy of Health Laws of Moses Vindicated by Modern Science. The Voice of Prophecy, Box 55, Los Angeles, California 90053. Voice of Prophecy News, March 1969. Excerpts from Health Laws of Moses. Dr. Paul Dudley White, Boston heart specialist, stated that, quote, "It is conceivable that a few years from now, we medical men may repeat to the citizens of the USA the advice that Moses was asked by God to present to the children of Israel 3,000 years ago, namely, that you must eat no fat of the ox or of the sheep or the goat. You may use it in another way, but by no means eat it." End quote. Dr. David Macht, authority on animal and drug poisons, discovered, quote, "There seems to be some scientific basis for the ancient classification of edible and unedible fishes, namely, those which have scales and those which have not." End quote. Poisonous extracts from unclean fish killed mice and retarded growth of seedlings, which extracts from the clean fish did neither. Rudolf Virchow, recognized father of modern pathology, said, "Moses was the greatest hygienist the world has ever seen." The Dark Ages. The terrible diseases of leprosy in Europe could not be controlled by the medical authorities, and not until the Church put into effect the concept found in the Law of Moses, Leviticus 13 and 14, was the epidemic brought under control. Where do we find these wonderful standards? Quote, "That the obligations of the Decalogue might be more fully understood and enforced, additional precepts were given, illustrating and applying the principles of the Ten Commandments. Unlike the Ten Commandments, they were delivered privately to Moses and written by Moses in a book. These directions were only the principles of the Ten Commandments amplified and given in a specific manner that none need err. They were designed to guard the sacredness of the 10 precepts." End quote. Patriarchs and Prophets, pages 310, 312, and 364. Quote, "God graciously spoke his law and wrote it on stone. Christ, to enforce the will of his Father, became the author of the statutes and precepts book given. Moses, these statutes were explicitly given to guard the 10 Commandments. They were not shadowy types to pass away with the death of Christ. They were to be binding upon man in every age as long as time should last." End quote. Review and Herald, May 6, 1875. Quote, "While Moses was in the mount, God presented to him not only the table of the law, stone, but also the plan of salvation, book." End quote. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 330. Quote, "And it came to pass, when Moses had made an end of writing the words of this law in a book, until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, Take this book of the law, and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee. For I know evil will befall you in the latter days." End quote. Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 24 to 26 and 29. Quote, "We are to become familiar with the Levitical law in all its bearings, to understand better the rule of faith and practice." End quote. Letter 3, 1905. Quote, "The gospel is given in precept in Leviticus. Obedience is required now as then." End quote. Testimonies for the Church, Volume 6, page 392. Quote, "Again, in the book, The precepts were reminded of the Sabbath. Yearly feasts were appointed. These laws, Levitical, were to be recorded by Moses in a book, and carefully treasured as the foundation of the national law, and with the 10 precepts which they were given to illustrate, the condition of the fulfillment of God's promises." Patriarchs and Prophets, page 311. Yes, dear brethren, the same law that outlined the healthful living to the Hebrews also outlined their system of worship. And now that science has recognized the validity of the health laws of the Levitical law, it is time for the Church to recognize the entire system of worship of the Levitical law. Yes, even though we have believed that the Levitical law was abolished at the cross, science is helping us to see that it was not. And the honorable thing for us to do, as whole Bible Christians, is to adjust our system of worship to include all the Sabbaths, feast days, not only the weekly Sabbath, but the yearly Sabbaths as well. Listen to history's voice. Who changed the weekly feast, the seventh-day Sabbath? Quote, "The Catholic Church of its own infallible authority created Sunday a holy day to take the place of the Sabbath of the old law." End quote. Kansas City Catholic, February 9, 1893. Who changed the yearly feasts? Passover, Pentecost, etc. Quote, "The new law has its own spirit, and its own feasts, which have taken the place of those appointed in the law of Moses. If we would know the days to be observed, we must go to the Catholic Church, not to the Mosaic law." End quote. Signs of the Times, November 4, 1919. Catholic Catechism. Quote, "And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times, seventh-day Sabbath, weekly feast, and Passover, Pentecost Sabbaths, etc., yearly feasts, and laws, the book law and the stone law." End quote. Daniel chapter 7, verse 25. Feast in Hebrew means appointed meeting. Quote, "In the time of the end, every divine institution is to be restored." End quote. Prophets and Kings, page 678. Friend, now you see clearly that the Pope, not Jesus, changed the yearly feasts of the Mosaic book law. Read all of Leviticus 23, Nahum chapter 1 verse 15, Acts chapter 18 verse 21, 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verses 7 and 8. Quote, "At Philippi Paul tarried to keep the feast of Passover." End quote. Acts of the Apostles, page 39. Whose feasts will you keep? And to whom will you go? The Pope or Moses? May 1971. The Branch by Benjamin Roden.